Did Pope Theophilus demolish the temple of Serapion upon the heads of the pagans while they were inside? The author states the above fraud on pages 71, 72 and 152 in the Arabic version. It is evident here as to what extent the author has falsified the truth in reversing the roles of the Christians to the pagans and the pagans to the Christians. The truth, as we shall observe, is that the pagans tortured and murdered the Christians surprisingly within the temple of Serapion itself. Moreover, the pagans fled from the temple prior to Pope Theophilus' entrance. No references have absolutely ever mentioned the involvement of Pope Theophilus in the murdering of any pagans. We shall refer to two famous historians renowned throughout the history of patrology for their resentment and sometimes enmity towards Pope Theophilus, namely Socrates and Sozomen. If there was any slightest suspicion on Pope Theophilus, these two historians would have been the first to mention it, considering that in other events they spoke of him with deep hostility. Socrates, 380 to 450 AD, was a contemporary to this historical event in 391 and described the event as follows. To begin with, he, that is Pope Theophilus, caused the Mithraeum to be cleaned out and exhibited to public view the tokens of its bloody mysteries. The Serapion also he showed full of extravagant superstitions, and he had the folly of Priapus carried through the midst of the forum. The pagans of Alexandria, especially the professors of philosophy, were unable to repress their rage at this exposure, and exceeded in revengeful ferocity their outrages on the former occasion. For with one accord, at a preconcerted signal, they rushed impetuously upon the Christians and murdered everyone that they could lay their hands on. The Christians also made an attempt to resist the assailants, and so the mischief was more augmented. This desperate affray was prolonged until satiety of bloodshed put an end to it. Fear then possessed the pagans on account of what was done, as they considered the emperor's displeasure. For having done what they seemed good in their own eyes, and by their bloodshed having quenched their courage, some fled in one direction, some in another, and many quitting Alexandria dispersed themselves in various cities. Sozomen was contemporary to Socrates. However, the exact dates of his birth and death are unknown. It is known that he wrote the historical period between 324 and 439 AD, and published his works between 439 and 450 AD. Sozomen cites as Socrates, but with more detail. The Bishop of Alexandria, to whom the temple of Dionysius had, at his own request, been granted by the emperor, converted the edifice into a church. The statues were removed, the idata were exposed, and in order to cast contumely on the pagan mysteries, he made a procession for the display of these objects, the phalli, and whatever other object had been concealed in the idata, which really was or seemed to be ridiculous, he made a public exhibition of. The pagans, amazed at so an unexpected exposure, could not suffer it in silence, but conspired together to attack the Christians. They killed many of the Christians, wounded others, and seized the Serapion, a temple which was conspicuous for beauty and vastness, and which was seated on an eminence. This they converted into a temporary citadel, and hither they conveyed many of the Christians, put them to torture, and compelled them to offer sacrifice. Those who refused compliance were put to death in some cruel manner. When the sedition had prevailed for some time, the rulers came and urged the people to remember the laws, to lay down their arms, and to give up the Serapion. There came then Romanus, the general of the military legions in Egypt, and Evagrius was the prefect of Alexandria. As their efforts, however, to reduce the people to submission were utterly in vain, they made known what had transpired to the emperor. When the emperor was informed of these occurrences, he declared that the Christians who had been slain were blessed, inasmuch as they had been admitted to the honor of martyrdom and had suffered in the defense of their faith. He offered free pardon to those who had slain them, hoping that by this act of clemency they would be more readily induced to embrace Christianity. And he commanded the demolition of the temples in Alexandria, which had been the cause of popular sedition. It is said that when the imperial edict was read in public, the Christians uttered loud shouts of joy. The people who were guarding the Serapion were so terrified at the hearing of these shouts that they took flight, and the Christians immediately obtained possession of the spot, which they had retained ever since. Another reference states the event as follows. The general in command at Alexandria and the augustal prefect summoned them to surrender, but in vain. Olympus, a philosopher, sustained their obstinate resolution until the arrival of an edict ordering the destruction of all temples. Terrified by the shouts that proclaimed this mandate, the desperadoes abandoned the Serapion.